For nearly 9 years, I've served as a K9 handler, partnered with Rex, a 4-year-old German Shepherd. He's expertly trained in tracking and narcotics detection and possesses an unwavering steadiness. He's not easily startled. I've brought him into various challenging environments, warehouses, derelict houses, and dense woods at night, and he's consistently been reliable. That's why the events of one particular night remain so vivid in my memory. We were summoned to assist patrol in a house search following a foot pursuit in the area. Officers had attempted to detain a male suspect several blocks away, but he fled. Their chase led them through residential backyards, ultimately losing sight of him near this specific property. An open side gate to the yard was discovered, along with an unlocked back door to the house. The situation was lent further urgency by neighbors who reported hearing a struggle in the backyard. Patrol officers had already swept the first floor, but remained uneasy about declaring it safe, suspecting the individual might have gained entry and could still be concealed somewhere within the residence. Rex and I arrived approximately 20 minutes later. The house, a 2-story structure, was located in a tranquil subdivision. There was no evidence of forced entry visible from the front of the house. The officers on the scene quickly briefed me, explaining that while there were no obvious indications of a struggle, the open access at the rear of the house and the suspect's disappearance within yards of it were concerning. I attached Rex to a short leash and issued the search command. He immediately surged forward, moving systematically through the first-floor rooms. The living room, kitchen, and laundry room were all cleared. We then proceeded upstairs. The upper level featured a narrow hallway leading to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. There was a noticeable absence of fresh air or drafts, and all windows appeared to be closed, which was expected given that neighbors had reported the owners were out of town. Rex and I checked the first bedroom, then the second. He then decisively pulled towards the bathroom at the end of the hall. I inspected the small bathroom, finding it generally clean, with nothing out of place in any of the rooms we had checked. Rex sniffed around the room, particularly along the edge of the vanity and the floor. Suddenly, he froze. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and he began to growl, directing his gaze outside the bathroom door. His growls escalated into barks. He was fixated on something in the hallway, growling and barking intently. I cautiously backed out of the bathroom with him. "What is it?" I whispered. Rex remained fixated on a spot down the hallway. At the very end, near the last bedroom door, I saw what had drawn his attention, a figure standing there. It was tall, dark, and utterly motionless. This figure did not resemble any of the officers I knew were downstairs, and they would certainly have announced their presence if they were approaching. I identified myself as law enforcement and stated that I had a K9 with me, but there was no response. Then I simply asked, "Who is that?" Still, silence. Rex, to my surprise, was pulling in the opposite direction, a behavior I had never witnessed from him before. He clearly did not want to proceed down the hall. The figure then turned and entered the bedroom at the end of the hallway. I was familiar with every officer on the scene and their assigned positions. None were supposed to be upstairs with me. Rex dug his heels in when I tried to move forward, pulling back forcefully. He was vehemently against going down that hallway. I drew my weapon and announced over the radio that I had potentially located the suspect in the end bedroom, instructing them to make their way up. I had to physically pull Rex forward, and he resisted every step of the way, repeatedly looking at me as if questioning why I was forcing him to go. When we reached the bedroom doorway, he refused to cross the threshold with me. I entered the room first, weapon raised, only to find it completely empty. Just a bed against one wall and a dresser opposite. I waited for the other officers to arrive before fully examining the room. When we finally entered, there was no one standing or hiding, neither under the bed nor elsewhere. The window was shut, and even the closet was devoid of occupants. There was no attic hatch or crawl space entrance. Rex, meanwhile, remained in the hallway, steadfastly refusing to step inside the room. I anticipated skepticism from the others, but his unusual behavior was evident to them. One officer attempted to coax him in, but he would not budge. We meticulously searched every inch of that bedroom, checking the walls for false panels and re-examining the bathroom and the other bedroom. There was no secret passage or trapdoor anywhere. Had it not been for Rex's reaction, I believe I would have questioned my own sanity. After about 20 minutes, I informed the others that I needed to remove Rex from the premises. As we left, he kept glancing back down the hall towards that bedroom. The moment we stepped outside into the night air, he visibly relaxed. Once in his crate, he immediately curled up, but his usual post-search demeanor was absent. He looked different. Patrol concluded their operations shortly thereafter. I've replayed that experience countless times in my mind. I believe I saw a real person, likely the suspect. Yet, the mystery of how they vanished from that room and the reason for Rex's unprecedented behavior remains. Perhaps more skeptical individuals will suggest that Rex and I encountered a ghost. Rex has never reacted like that before or since. He has unhesitatingly tracked armed suspects and navigated environments far more stressful than that house. But that particular room, he absolutely refused to enter. My trust in that dog surpasses even my own instincts. Nearly everyone in my department can recount at least one inexplicable night call, and this one was mine. At 21, I joined the police force in an unnamed remote town. The department needed new officers, and as a young father in need of income, the timing was ideal. Being a rookie, I was assigned to the night shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. While colleagues sometimes teased me about working the crummiest shifts, I didn't mind. I've always been a night owl. Beyond sighting speeders and occasional drunk drivers, most nights were spent listening to podcasts, which in a strange way was quite relaxing. A year into my service, an incident one night altered everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled through town, causing widespread power outages. Torrential rain flooded major roads. To position myself best for incoming accident reports, I parked my patrol car in a centrally located parking lot. At 2 a.m., our dispatcher, Claire, radioed in. She reported receiving a call from an individual sounding like an adult male who claimed to have been kidnapped and held captive inside someone's home. The call abruptly ended. When she redialed, there was no answer. My cruiser's built-in computer display showed call details. Based on the address, I was about 10 minutes away, likely the closest officer. I radioed in, confirming my response, and requested backup. Another new officer, Chris, chimed in, saying he would be on location in 5 minutes. Claire hesitated for a few seconds amidst the static before speaking again. She noted that the callers seemed to be artificially altering their voice, possibly digitally, to sound like a child, specifically using the phrase, "like a young girl." She advised officers to proceed with extreme caution. We were all quite close at the station, and high-risk calls like this always made us nervous for one another. I radioed back with a 10-4 and drove towards the scene. As I turned into the neighborhood, I noticed every street lamp was out. The entire block had lost power. This meant low visibility into the house we were investigating, significantly increasing our danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street where the house was located, arriving to find Chris already there, his cruiser idling in front. I pulled up beside him and rolled down my window. Chris commented on the house's dilapidated condition. I looked ahead, taking it in myself. Knee-high grass, overgrown bushes obscuring the windows, a dented roof with numerous missing shingles. It appeared utterly abandoned, setting off alarm bells in my head. A person's living space often reveals much about their mental state. I told Chris I would take the lead. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain, opened our umbrellas, and followed a waterlogged path to the door. Chris activated his flashlight. During an investigation, A second officer like Chris is entirely focused on protecting the lead officer by monitoring the suspect's body language. If the suspect makes a move against the interrogating officer, the backup officer neutralizes the threat. Chris was an ideal backup because he was both perceptive and composed under pressure. This allowed me to concentrate solely on the suspect's narrative and ascertain its veracity. Upon reaching the door, I rang the bell. We then stood, listening for movement inside. After a few seconds, footsteps shuffled towards the door, then paused. Whoever was on the other side became completely still, simply waiting. A distinct feeling of being watched came over me. Slowly, my gaze drifted to the peephole. The instant I made eye contact, a distorted shape recoiled, as if the person watching us had pulled their head away. "If you're in there, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Open up, please," I stated. They froze again, as if deliberating their next move. Then, the lock started turning, and the door creaked open, but only by about a foot. From the darkness, a man in his early 30s, overweight, balding, and wearing thick-rimmed glasses, peered out through the crack. One glance into his eyes told me he was concealing something. I informed him that we had received a call from his address regarding someone claiming to have been kidnapped. The man feigned confusion. He apologized, claiming it must have been an accidental dial. I pressed him, asking how a pocket dial could explain the voice we heard during the call. For a fleeting moment, his eyes flickered away before he denied any knowledge of a voice. I then inquired if anyone else was in the residence, to which he responded he lived alone. I informed him that for safety reasons, we needed to inspect the interior. He countered that we couldn't without a warrant. I explained that warrants could now be processed in mere minutes. Returning to my patrol car, I contacted dispatch and requested a connection with the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, Claire communicated via radio that the judge had approved a telephonic warrant and emailed it to us. We were cleared to proceed. I presented the warrant to the man. He reluctantly pulled the door open, his hands visibly trembling. I activated my flashlight and stepped inside. Immediately, a putrid odor assailed me. Scanning for its origin, I noted a hallway directly ahead and a room to my right. I shone my light into the room, revealing what appeared to be a living area. It was utterly filthy. Piles of clothing and stacks of unwashed dishes were strewn across the carpet, and cockroaches scuttled over them. A dilapidated couch, as if salvaged from the roadside, was angled against the wall. This individual clearly used this space as his primary living area. I had encountered such living conditions before, often linked to drug cases. When I turned back to face the man, he shifted uneasily. I made a mental note to check for drug paraphernalia once the house was deemed secure. Approaching the hallway, my foot struck something. I looked down. In the beam of my flashlight, I recognized a pink Barbie doll playhouse, a set I had purchased for my daughter the previous Christmas. I asked the man if he had children. He replied no, but explained that his nieces occasionally visited, so he kept some toys for them. Chris and I exchanged a glance. No responsible mother would allow children into such an environment. I told him this was his final opportunity to disclose if anyone else was inside. He insisted no one was. As I proceeded down the hallway, the man followed, asserting that nothing was further down. Chris firmly pulled him back by the arm, instructing him to remain in place. The hallway featured open rooms on either side and a closed door at its end, likely leading to the basement. I peered into the first room, scanning from right to left, and observed more children's toys, along with items like diapers, scattered across the floor. In a corner, a dark, hunched figure appeared. I drew my weapon, only to realize it was a doll, head slumped, in a rocking chair. The shock of the sight made my heart pound. I leaned against the doorframe, steadying my breath. Chris asked what I had seen. Before I could reply, I began to examine the doll. It was unusually large, human-sized, and dressed in women's clothing by the man. On the adjacent bed, women's blouses, jeans, and lingerie were folded into neat, color-separated piles. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was a complete disaster. What was unfolding in this room felt profoundly unsettling. "All clear," I reported to Chris. I continued down the hall, glancing into the second bedroom. It was empty. Reaching the final door at the end of the hall, the man behind me called out, asking if I preferred to see the upstairs instead. I affirmed, but stated I would inspect the basement first. The man reiterated that nothing was down there. I heard Chris instruct the man to remain still, indicating he was trying to follow me down the hall. The closer I ventured into this part of the house, the more agitated the man became. I reached for the handle, twisted the knob, and pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges. A flight of wooden stairs descended into a pitch-black space. I shone my light downwards. Only the area immediately surrounding the landing was visible, appearing as cluttered as the upstairs. From deep within the unseen parts of the room, something rattled. I informed Chris that I detected movement. The man responded instead, apologizing repeatedly to both Chris and me. Despite my reluctance, I had no alternative. The man was being dishonest. Someone was down there. I began my descent down the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The rattling from inside the room intensified. Behind me, the man implored us to stop searching. As I neared the landing, I swept my flashlight across stacks of boxes. No one was immediately visible. Across the room, there was another door. The noise originated from there. I drew my weapon. I commanded whoever was inside to exit slowly with raised hands. The movement inside ceased. I repeated the command. The door remained shut. I traversed the room, maneuvering between boxes and old furniture that obstructed my path. My sights were fixed on the door. Standing several feet away, I paused to listen. The occupant inside also remained perfectly still. My anxiety escalated with each passing second. So many potential dangers in this situation. I positioned myself to the side of the doorframe, anticipating the possibility of an armed person firing through the door. I reached for the knob, grasped it, and twisted. Then I swung the door open, pressing myself against the side of the frame. If anything other than empty hands emerged, I would be forced to use lethal force. After several agonizing moments, nothing appeared. I offered a quick prayer, then aimed my weapon directly into the room. What I witnessed, I cannot detail, but in essence, this is what transpired. A man in his mid-40s was being held captive in that basement. He was a father of 3 and a respected community member. Months after his disappearance, everyone, including his family, presumed him deceased. After 2 years in captivity, he finally seized an opportunity to escape. Earlier that night, before our arrival, the homeowner had brought the victim his dinner and mistakenly left his phone behind. The victim managed to activate Siri and call 911. When we arrived, the victim had already been restricted in a manner that prevented him from calling upstairs or making any significant noise. Then, when I ordered him to exit, he froze in fear, not because he couldn't comply, but because he didn't want me to perceive him as a threat and use lethal force. Once I opened the door and discovered him, we immediately arrested the homeowner and transported the victim to the hospital for urgent medical attention. I feel incredibly fortunate that no one was harmed and that we could reunite this man with his family. Yet the most disturbing detail, which has haunted me daily since, is how my dispatcher described the voice of the man who made the call. Why was he speaking like a child? The only plausible explanation is that this man had been forced to adopt that youthful tone of voice for so long that even when calling the station, it was his only means of communication. And if he was compelled to do that, what else within that house was he forced to endure? I have been a patrol officer for slightly over 8 years now, spending most of that time on night shifts. You witness a great deal during the midnight hours. For instance, I've lost count of how many domestic disputes, drunk drivers, break-ins, and overdoses I've had to manage. After a while, most calls begin to merge. You arrive, separate parties, file a report, perhaps make an arrest, then move on. Only a handful of calls have ever truly stayed with me. This is one of them. It occurred in late October a few years ago, around 2:40 in the morning. Dispatch assigned me to a 911 hang-up. The caller reported hearing a woman screaming from inside the neighboring house. The address was on a tranquil residential street, one familiar to most, lined with single-family homes in a respectable neighborhood, nothing that typically generated significant police activity. The caller stated the screaming had ceased by the time she dialed 911, but she was certain she had heard someone crying for help. I was only about 5 minutes away. When I pulled up, the street was utterly silent. Most houses, of course, had their lights off at that hour. A light rain had begun to fall, just enough to make the pavement shimmer under the streetlights. The house in question was a 2-story residence with a small front porch. No lights were visible inside from the street. I parked a few houses away and approached on foot. As I drew closer, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. This immediately heightened my awareness, confirming some validity to the woman's report. I radioed dispatch, advising I was on scene and had an open door. I requested another unit to head my way, but at that time of night, the nearest backup was at least 10 minutes out. I stepped onto the porch and listened. The only sound was the gentle rain hitting the ground. I knocked on the door frame and announced myself. Police department. No response. I knocked again, a little louder. At that point, with a report of screams and an open door, I had exigent circumstances. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Nothing immediately stood out. No signs of forced entry or unusual odors. The living room was directly ahead, and everything appeared normal and tidy. There were no indications of a struggle. I searched the living room first, checking behind the couch and in the corners. Then I moved toward the kitchen. My flashlight beam reflected off clean countertops and a sink full of dishes. A glass sat on the table with what appeared to be water still in it. I recall that particular detail because I made a mental note, signifying that someone had recently occupied that space. Police department, I announced again. If anyone is present, identify yourselves. My voice, in the quiet dwelling, seemed excessively loud. Rarely did late-night calls unnerve me, but this situation was decidedly unsettling. I half expected an answer from upstairs, but none came. I proceeded down the hallway towards the rear of the house. I remembered the layout. A small bathroom on the right, a guest bedroom on the left, both appeared clear. At the hallway's end, a staircase ascended. As my foot touched the first step, I heard a faint, quick shuffle from above, like a foot dragging across carpet. I paused, listening intently. Drawing my weapon, I ascended the stairs slowly, one step at a time, my light directed forward. The upstairs hallway featured 3 doors. 2 were closed, one slightly ajar, the open one situated at the far end. Upon reaching the top, I heard it again, a soft movement from that direction. For a third time, I announced my presence, instructing whoever was inside to show their hands. There was no reply. I approached the open doorway and pushed it wider with my foot. It was a bedroom, larger than the one downstairs. The bed was disheveled, with sheets partially hanging off the side. A lamp on the nightstand lay overturned on the floor. This was the first anomaly I noted. Stepping inside, I checked the closet. It was empty. Under the bed, nothing. The window was closed and locked, showing no obvious entry or exit point for that room. A familiar unease settled in my chest, the feeling one gets when details don't align. The remainder of the upstairs still required